Hello, everybody, and welcome into today's episode of the Top Cut Yu-Gi-Oh! Podcast. My name is Sunny. I am here with my co-host, Caleb.
Hello.
And before we get too far in, we of course want to thank all of our patrons. So a huge thank you to Austin Johnson, Salix, Kane, Martin, Damian, Zink, Marshawn Jones, Master of Isa, Mr. Herbie's, Witchcrafter Main 2022, Zephyrus, AD, Aaron Gardner, Anthony Leela, Appaloosa is a Floodgate, Dank Nugs now with Dino DNA, Kevin Hugh, Matt, Mountain Man, Myth Oceanus, Owen Alvarado, Pig, Rudolph, Seth Sneaky Links, Chris Myers, MBT's Hard Leg, Ray Powell, Slaking It Up, Sunny Sweet, and Zyphorus. Thank you all so much for your continued support of the podcast. If you would like to support the podcast at no extra cost to yourself, you can always find our TCG Player affiliate link in the description down below. And if you are interested in getting our playmat on Imperium Duelist, you can find the link to that down below. And as always, you should be able to follow us on Twitter at Top Cut Podcast and follow us on or join our Discord server. And if you want to do our Top Cut locals, we are doing those every Thursday night in the server. It is free entry. It is just there to help everybody get better at the game. So please be sure to join and come out and hang out with us on that. And I think that's it. Caleb, you got anything else?
Nope. You just about covered everything I could think of.
All right. And with that, let's go ahead and introduce our wonderful guest. So how are you today, Mr. John Moore?
What's good, Top Cut? And welcome to the podcast.
That is everything I hoped it would be. Thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. The man, the myth, the legend, John Moore from the House of Champs YouTube channel. So, I just jumping right on into it. Where does that name come from, that House of Champs moniker?
Okay, so it's very creative, I know. There were two champions living in a house, and we started a YouTube channel.
Fair enough. Hard to argue. I mean, it just works. It just works.
For those that don't know, my roommate used to be Billy Break, one of the best in the game. He recently-ish moved out to work for Konami. As you might have seen his updated title on the streams, it says that he's now a Konami employee. He's actually not allowed to play in, I think it's above Tier 2 events right now, so he can't actually go and try for a 5th win. As I understand, Jackie actually has him playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Again. But for me, my win is ancient. It actually, if it was a human being, I think wouldn't be allowed to play Dragon Duels after this year.
That's something to think about.
Yeah, I think about the time you won, we weren't actually like all the way in competitive yet. We didn't really get competitive until about Edison format is when we started really like trying to go to like locals and even to regionals and stuff. So it's a really kind of an interesting dichotomy of when people, it's interesting to talk to people that were like playing at the highest level before we even really got into the game.
For me, I've been there as a Yu-Gi-Oh! Dinosaur since the very beginning. I actually got in with LOB when the anime came on the TV. I just stopped Pokemon. I had actually given my cards to my brothers, and then I saw the first episode, and I'm like, oh, I've gotta have that. I got 6 packs at a bookstore that doesn't even exist anymore that used to be a chain called Borders. LOB, I pulled 1 leg of Exodia. My highest attack monster was 1600. It wasn't until Metal Raiders I even found out starter decks existed, so I got the typical you go to locals, get ripped off for your first trades. But I got very lucky. In Metal Raiders, I happened upon one of the boxes that had 4 to 5 foils in every single pack, and the rest were rares. So it was crazy packs. I had like 6 Mirror Forces, and the moment I saw how eager people were to trade with me, even 13-year-old little John Moore was like, wait a minute, I'm gonna stop trading for the day and start to look things up online, because I traded 1 Mirror Force for 2 Blue Eyes, and that was very bad back then. Now, not so terrible. First ed starter deck Blue Eyes is they're going for a pretty penny, but back then it was a total ripoff. And I didn't even have sleeves for like my 60 card decks. They had to explain the rules to me. Yes, you tribute monsters. All the sort of typical first mistakes for locals. And after that, I just got fired up. I wanted to beat everybody. I wanted to win. I was finally playing in tournaments, which I never did with Pokemon. Like, I was actually old enough to comprehend entry, getting to play, how it all went. So that's kind of my entry into the world of Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh, but it's definitely on the back of like the anime and exposure back then. And from there, I've been in the competitive scene ever since MRD. I was on the Pojo forums. I was peeking over at DGZ while that was popping, and all of the ancient tools. Oh my gosh. And the different eras of teams. I can go on for hours, so I'll let you get some more focused questions in here.
Yeah, definitely. I do think, though, that your career spanning the entire life of the game itself is, without a doubt, one of the most storied careers, one of the most interesting, and one of the most electric and the most iconic. And a lot of people might not even realize that. There's not a lot of people that can say that they have, for the most part, been a part of this game in one way or another for the entire time. I mean, there's probably very little time where you've taken real breaks throughout your time in the game. Is that a fair assessment?
I've actually never taken a complete break. Whenever I would stop playing, I was vending, which would be Dragon Ruler format on through about wind-up loop format. And even then, I would still, while I'm at the tournaments, be playing to not disrespect the TOs and, make sure that I actually would go to all the vendors too and like try to make sure I could make money buying from the vendors and that kind of stuff, which a lot of people sleep on that one. A lot of people don't go booth to booth, find out why these certain vendors specialize in what they do, why they're there, why they have a name, because a lot of them do different things better. For example, Trollentode, who's actually a sponsor of mine now, I actually used to do a huge level of business with them through their buy list, and their buy list would be very specialized, and then there would be money to be made also by the store credit actually juicing. I think it's like 35% now, it used to be 25%, and getting those kinds of deals and then waiting for their Black Friday deals. I actually ended up buying some of my own playmats back from them at a discount during some of those sales. But it's funny the kind of cycles you can get to where you realize this vendor's thriving because of this, or used to Untapped Games was the big name in taking in bulk, or why are these guys at every single event game time? What's making them thrive? Oh, I can actually buy cards from them if I'm talking and dealing with them on a pretty large scale. There's so many things that could, if you work and really like network, which is in any field something that people don't consider, the vendors, if you're trying to be a floor vendor, aren't necessarily your enemy, but can become one of your greatest lifelines and making consistent money at these events.
Absolutely. I think that like you said, networking is huge on a lot of different levels. And in this card game, it can really make the difference on your ability to play the game on a competitive level sometimes.
Yeah, so you'll also, by keeping up with prices these days, notice trends before they spike into the physical card game, be it from the OCG and hype from over there, which may or may not translate into our game. And these days it's worse than ever because every single rogue deck spikes into oblivion just off the hype of a reveal, which is different than how it used to be. But the true trends that also will follow, like people who were sleeping on Mega Ryza and then it actually dipped again and went back up, or more recently, a Luber actually dipped after its initial buyouts. It was 70, went back down to 55, people started snoring, and now it's over 100.
Yeah. I made the biggest mistake ever when I sold mine for 35, and then the structure deck got announced like the next week. Oh
yeah,
brutal.
The biggest of oofs.
Yeah, it was brutal. It was bad.
Yeah, I remember you calling me up and be like, I messed up.
Yep, as soon as the structure got announced, I called Caleb and I was like, I may have made a mistake.
Yeah.
The thing is, no matter how good you are at the market or how good of a player you are, you will always make mistakes. For example, for me, I sold Max C's at their very bottom of like $11, $12 before they spiked to 80. I had like 25 of them. They're sitting there and I'm like, you know what? I could flip this into something else. I've speculated on this card far too long. It sat and sunk for a very long time before it ended up really spiking through the roof. And people don't remember that moment in history where, yeah, obviously this card's going to make it one day, but I've been sitting on this for far too long and you want your money to actually move. And sometimes you got to really diamond hands and sometimes you've got to make the call to, okay, it's fine to take an L, my money starts to start moving, that kind of stuff. And people you're going to make your wrong calls, no matter how good you are or how bad the hindsight seems 2020.
Definitely. So I want to kind of start a little bit further back, right? I want to start at the beginning and find out a little bit more about John Moore, the player. So I know obviously there's like the memes within the community about John won't let us forget about his SJC win. But
okay, that's only Coder. That is only Coder.
But yeah, definitely. But just, realistically, there is definitely something to be said for you are a SJC champion, right? Like that's not something that can ever change. And it's a very short list of people that are there, right? It's not everybody can be an SJC or YCS champion. So I think that there's something really to be respected about playing at the highest levels of the game at any point in the game's history. So I'm kind of curious to get some of your perspectives maybe on how the game was different at that time at the highest levels versus, and I know that you don't necessarily play at a high level these days, you're more into the content creation side, but your perspective on the game at the highest levels then versus now.
So one huge difference was information sharing, like the advent of YouTube, Yugi-tubing. That was not a thing in 2002. YouTube didn't even exist. So going through, you were in message boards trying to figure out what's happening, but the real goo was going to be held by the teams, and teams have also evolved into 3 ways. So to explain the difference of a team back then versus today, teams back then were basically comprised of the best players being really tight-knit, not leaking things. It would be mega drama if leaks happened outside of the group, even from playtesting. You were only the playtest with the team partners when the techs were being developed, because here's what the good teams would try to do. They look at the last event. Then they figure out what beats the last event. Then they go a step further and figure out what beats last event. So that's what they would be consistently labbing. They'd be like, okay, this tech clearly beats that, but can we counter the tech that we're using in the deck because we've only evolved it a little, but can we make a workaround? Or you would have the surprise burn decks that would suddenly win, such as Kenny So from Comic Odyssey, who is actually the owner of Core TCG, taking down the 2007 last Troop Dupe format. Nobody in the world saw Burn winning, but Comic Odyssey labbed that one, right? So you have the teams of old, and Texas's star is Outphase, California's star is Overdose, and you have a lot of the even older teams that are very renowned, Team Nexus, and so many just good teams and memories. You can't name all of them, but Outphase was Texas's big one, consisting of heavy hitters like Philly Luna, the first to get 4 wins. Billy Break actually ends up on Outphase later, the only other duelist to hit 4 wins. When I say wins, it's YCS SJC. Other people have achieved the 4-win threshold, including stuff like UDSs and Nats and that kind of thing, but only 2 people still hold the 4 YCS SJC wins, and that's Philly and Billy out of Texas. So you have just all these heavy hitters, Jason Holloway, you have Chris Bowling, who will become a national champion and YCS champion, all information sharing to become better players to beat not only the next best deck, but then what's further beyond. And they tested with me a lot because they wanted to see, like, okay, what's this rogue option? Why am I not beating it? And Samurai was one of the first ones that they wanted to test with me for, because before my win, I actually topped in 07. So I got kind of brought into the fold of traveling with them, all these events, going with them out places, and, testing with them. And my only other top that's not Samurai's is when I traveled with them in 2007 for Indianapolis, where 3 of us in the car top. It's me, Philly, and Billy. We all top Shonen Jump Indianapolis with Troop Dupe, although we all play different variants, ironically. I play Troop Dupe Monarch side into full machine. I was actually doing it the reverse way, but Billy convinced me to switch, and I topped the regionals, which that's another story. Oh my gosh, the Indianapolis Gen Con regionals were like a Shonen Jump. And then Billy is on Baboon, of all things, and really hyping that up because Baboon hadn't made its real, statements, and Philly was on his different kind of build too. So all of us in the car, 3 out of 5 people in the car managed to top the event. And you would see that way too often from teams because we're labbing, we're ahead, and we're figuring out what we're doing with the game before anybody else, because you don't have all these people testing and information sharing and doing it. You have the true secrets, and all of that falls to an end for, I know I'm going on a bit of a tangent, all of that falls to an end with the Hoban clan, I want to say later on. There's this event where it's Secret Village of the Spellcasters during Necros, and that leaks out the night before, and I feel like that's the last era you ever see of these teams, because the information sharing, it just can't stay a secret anymore. People aren't able to do that. And then later you see the sponsorship teams pop up, like the Card Guys, Pro Play Games, Jobber, where it's not really about testing, but it's more about like, yo, we get paid for this profile, or we have these circles within the teams, instead of that pure information sharing powerhouse that it used to be.
I think that there's also something to be said, and you can confirm or deny this. I actually don't even know if this is something that really happened at the time, but I've heard, I don't know if this is true,
in the rumor mill.
Yeah, that way back in the day, there was also something to be said for teams that would work together and go to these SJCs, and they would win things like multiple crush card viruses, multiple gold sarks, and things like that, and share them around with the team and make the whole team stronger at that point.
Yes, to a degree. Like, Philly used a crush card to win crush cards, and that's something that they've talked about before, where, like, you know, Philly doesn't need a second crush card, so-and-so's going to buy or use it within the team. That definitely did happen, where the team starts rolling further and stronger. Like, Holloway was then, I believe, using crush card, and I forget if he was using it when he won or not, but it definitely wasn't mass available when he won, I believe, because that's still the dad return era before the Teledad era. So I'm pretty sure, I would think if we look at his list, that he was using crush card in there. But yeah, definitely teams having access to those kinds of cards and monopolizing on them was much bigger in the game back then.
Of course, I think there was also a bit of a different power level behind those championship prize cards than there is now. I mean, they can be good now, but at the time, crush card was just game breaking.
Yes, I want to say Crush is the pinnacle of that, but you do have other cards where the decks were only in the hands of people with them later, like Minerva Sworn, for example. I would get so many comments in the section like, call it Light Sworn. Why do you call it Minerva Sworn? How many Light Sworns are topping without Minerva? Exactly, not a single one on the YCS circuit, and only one, I believe, on the entire regional circuit without a Minerva ended up topping while Minerva was out there. So it was indeed the Minerva Sworn, or Caliber Cat, actually, in the area you're talking Edison. Caliber Cat, you had to have the Doom Cows, and that was a prize card.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, these are the distinctions that were really a lot more prevalent at the time than they are now. But even so, there's nothing that can be said to take away how huge having an SJC win in your repertoire of credentials is. I mean, it does so much to just help, you know, it's credibility, right?
Well, it was huge for me as I started vending. Pretty much everyone would let me borrow cards because I'm known, but I also was trading a lot on Pojo, so I had, like, feedback over 100, which was super rare back then. That, like, when I say 100, not 100%, but over 100 trades at 100%, which was rarer for online. So I had gotten my taste back in the day of, I wanted this hobby to self-sustain, which I know is way more prevalent in people's lives today, but definitely back then wasn't as much of a mindset. And I wanted to be able to, around 2007, I noticed I topped with Troop Dupe, but I came back home after 4 days hotel and also, you know, traveling, gas all the way there, with more money in my pocket and more trades. And I thought, wow, what did I do all weekend? I was like, I nonstop traded when I wasn't playing, and wait, I can actually make money traveling. That's when I had that moment of, yo, this could be more than just like self-sustaining. I think I could make this into a long-term thing. And I know what some people are already typing in your comment section. It's way different today. Everybody looks at their phone and is disinterested. And that's not really the truth as a whole. It's more that personality will shine through. There's still going to be that guy at locals when I bring it up that happens to have everything. Sometimes you go, oh, I have to deal with that guy. Instead of have to deal with that guy, you want to be the guy with everything where, oh, dude, you're here? Oh, thank gosh, I need this. And that all comes down to personality, and you'll have way more people checking with you, seeing what you have, avoiding those seller fees, being able to, quote unquote, make a deal a little under the seller fees, but make more than if you sold it on the platform, not have to deal with mailing it out, as long as you have a good relationship with your locals and you're working with these people. So that goes into the vending side of my career, where I see all those people like, it's not like it was then, John. I'm like, I know, I've been there, I've seen it, I've experienced it, and it comes down to personality, and not everybody is going to have that to deal and socialize and be that person that's not scum ripping somebody off when they get a chance. And a lot of people just don't get that. They think they have to max profit all the time. That's absolutely not how to do it. You do not max profit all the time. Sometimes breaking even trades are exactly what you want to do. You want to do speculatory things, and player brain can get you in trouble, as we mentioned, but a lot of the time when you're hitting and going in, and you're making the right calls, that those even trades will make you a lot of money too, and get you repeat business later.
Yeah, absolutely. And is that era around when you said you came back from Indianapolis and realized, hey, like there's something to this, is that kind of when you realized that maybe there might be something to vending, not just playing the game, but actually taking a stance in the business side of it?
What's funny is when I won that weekend, I actually, with Gold Sark being a $2,000 prize card, I made more trading that day, like throughout the weekend, I guess, than winning the event, despite having one of the money prize cards back then, in terms of like modern prize cards.
I would love for you to tell the story. You mentioned it on Twitter about having to get the card back for the picture.
Okay, so this is pretty bad, but this is all the way back in 2008 Upper Deck, so Konami, don't do anything, thanks. But I actually sold it to somebody who actually topped with it at the 50th in Costa Mesa. Mine's the 49th. And okay. I sold it to him so fast, like 2 to 3 minutes, that they made me go get it back from him. And he's walking out the door. They're like, you're in huge trouble if you don't get it back for the picture. I was like, but I traded it. Smile. And they're like, you go get it back right now. And so I ran out the door and I'm like, dude, don't go. I need it just for the picture. I'll hand it right back. You can follow me. You can be with me. I need it right now. And so I had to go back, and Jason Grabermeyer's standing there. He's one of the writers for TCG Player now, by the way. But I'm having to stand there and, while the other guys are staring at their card that they've already gotten from me, while I'm having to take a picture with it.
That is the kind of thing, that's the kind of stories that you just don't get out of people that haven't been playing the game forever. That's awesome.
Oh man, there's too many.
Oh yeah, I love stories like that. And they fit perfectly for our format. So
I know, right?
So how long did you vend before you started to think about maybe the possibility of content creation?
That's actually a funny story. So, when I actually started to do videos, it was in preparation to one day open a shop, but we had to do it early because Billy won. We were in the discussion mode of creating a channel, and Billy won, and I'm like, we have to start it now. We don't have the equipment that we want. I guess we're just going to go for it. And that was kind of unfortunate because then it took like 6 months to get equipment in and get it how we wanted. And what's kind of funny is people really like our old tabletop duels, and that was revolutionary for the time. Right. But like, I was on a $20 mic stand with electric tape and a Logitech C920, and in 2015, apparently that's high tech for YugiTube.
Oh boy, wow, you are speaking on our level.
Yeah, but the main part of it was that we were looking at one day probably opening a store, want to be huge with the community. And throughout time, as YouTube as a community took off, because I kind of wanted to do streaming, watching all the fighting game streams, like Team Spooky in New York, and you have IFC Yipes commentating. I'm like, one day there's going to be something like this for Yu-Gi-Oh! Perhaps. I was really thinking like being able to open a store, have the locals people come to, that be the content that kind of pays part of the rent of the store. That was my mindset. I watched 7 different friends get their stores robbed, kicked in, years of their life's gone, and I'm like, store owning might not be so much for me.
Yeah.
And by that time, my community had really taken its own shape, and I'm like, you know what? I can kind of be more of like this online locals space rather than, you know, a realistic locals, and not even be dealing with the front end, because in the content creation space for YugiTube, I set up a lot of the first sponsorships that you see. Like, nobody was sponsored, nobody was working with people. So I was basically going, yo, this is what I bring to the table. I think I can bring you this kind of exposure. I'll only make money when I make a sale in terms of my coupon code, so you don't have to worry about that. A lot of people won't take those kind of deals because they usually don't have the traction or attention or pull, but I'm like Texan, and that's how I am. If I make the sale, then I get a piece, and otherwise you don't have to pay me for the exposure and those X factors, where that's not good for a lot of creators though. But the volume did work out for me, and ended up, you know, having me talk to more people, work more deals 3 times, and I would either get approached or approach people, and I've turned down so many people because people think I'll race car my channel out with anything, but I immediately start reversing any interview to, okay, what do you bring versus my other sponsors? I've specifically gone out of my way. Troll and Toad has an amazing buy list, and they also ship to South America pretty much cheaper than anybody. Tier 0 is international. They ship everywhere, and they have some of the best pre-sales. Yu-Gi-Oh! Singles has some of the best pre-sales sanctioned for the US specifically, not just worldwide, and they do sometimes blow other prices out of the water. What do you bring to the table? And a lot of people that just think, oh, it's going to be easy, we'll have code What's Good 5, they find out, oh wait, no, we don't offer anything versus all these people. Like, Big 3 is consistently bringing good amounts of products at good prices and deals there too. Nobody else besides my sponsors that I currently have been able to look at all of them and say, we offer something that those guys don't in terms of cards. And then I love working with the artists in the community too. I actually have somebody else that'll be doing something soon unique to art, but you notice, like, I work with different sectors of like field centers, playmats. Jim has been innovating for a very long time in terms of like, they went from playmats to deck boxes that everybody's copied the style of, to binders that people are copying the style of, to now doing backpacks as well that nobody's been able to replicate and have become a mainstay in the community. I tend to look at things that aren't necessarily recreatable or replaceable or offer something super unique, and you've got to fit into that mold, which is where it comes back. When I used to be a vendor, I looked at all the shops and I said, what can I do in terms of business with them? Where can I benefit? And it comes back full circle to, now they can do something unique for my audience.
Definitely. So it's always interesting to see which, I noticed that for different things you promote different sponsors, and I think that a lot of that is mostly based off of truly, like, it's for the people, right? So you're definitely going to promote the sponsor that actually brings the best deal for your audience. And
So-
I think that there's something said to be said for that, right?
Here's the cool thing about that too. Whenever I get paid, I'm making a sale. That doesn't mean that the sponsor's paying me. It means the viewer is, which ultimately that means I have to have the viewer's long-term interest and thought. So I'm not paid by the sponsor in all technicality. I only make money when there's a sale, meaning I am paid directly through the audience.
Definitely. Yeah. And it shows the way that you can be supported in different ways, right? Not just by ad revenue and not just by Patreon subscriptions and things of that sort, but it shows that as a creator, there's other avenues to make your mark, if that makes sense, right?
Yeah, you don't have to do a set mold. Like, I'm also one of the only streamers that'll also stream to both YouTube and Twitch without partnering with Twitch, because even if you're affiliate, that automatically means they own your broadcast and you can't multi-broadcast. And I like being able to reach the YouTube audience and do different kinds of gimmicks there, like YouTube versus Twitch nights and stuff like that. You don't have to fit a specific mold, and you can definitely break a mold within the community. Also, funny story in the content creation space, a lot of Yu-Gi tubers didn't know anything about monetizing their channel. Like, Doug actually refused to monetize his channel, DZ, until I'm like,
This is
dude,
a story that I like hearing. I've
you-
heard this story. Go ahead.
you're big enough to be a channel that could be doing this for a living. Oh, it's not that big of a deal. He's working at Home Depot. I'm like, Doug, you're going to see a huge difference the moment you actually start trying and you start applying yourself. And he's like, no, there's no way. And I'm like, Doug, freaking do it. And the first month he's like, John, I made $200. And I'm like, yeah, I told you. And like, versus like he's now full-time sustaining off of that. That was him not really pushing too much and monetizing. He was like, I could have been making so much all along. And I'm like, Doug, I know. And he's only at 6K subs at that point, right? And now he's past me. He's gone to another level. And I told him, one day you're going to pass me. And he's like, no way. And I'm like, you have a freaking ability to, I forget it specifically what his degree is. I always call it writing, but I know it's not writing. But he like used to do articles. Like he actually did some feature match articles and stuff for Konami. And I'm like, you write really well, which means that's going to translate into your videos in terms of storytelling. And it's going to take off for you eventually, way past what I do.
Right. And that's also one of the things that I love most about hearing stories about your interactions with other creators in the community is I think that, and you may not even realize this, I think that you've really taken like, I almost want to say like a paternal spot in the community, right? Because there's so many different creators that we've talked to that have had these positive experiences with you, helping them with their channels, giving them advice, giving them motivation to keep moving and keep going forward. And these channels kind of take off and keep going forward. Is there any particular reason that you feel motivated to do that? Because you've been so instrumental in so many different people's channels.
So I'm a lot better at telling people what to do than doing it myself is part of it. I am very lazy. But also, the more you grow the space, the better it is for everybody. It's not as if they're going to suddenly be doing market watch on my level and taking what I do. It's they do this other thing that gets people into Yu-Gi-Oh! And I'm at the deeper level where you're likely at a competitive understanding. So the more gateways there are into Yu-Gi-Oh! The better it is for my channel. A lot of people, when they get in, have this walled up mindset of, oh, if they're going to go over there and view their channel and spend the time over there, and that means I'm going to lose time over here unless I do this flashy thing or that thing. Absolutely not. You're going to be breaking your own glass ceilings, and I often offer this perspective as a little 4-step thing in Yu-Gi tubing, that there are 4 things that you need to consider when being a channel. The top one's personality. You can't replace it. It'll come through even if it's not like, oh my gosh, best deck ever, oh, Pendulum best deck. It doesn't have to be hyperactive. That's what DZ and Rada show, that humor or actual personality through writing into words can be that way, but personality is not replaceable at all. Second is quality of content. Audio is probably the most important thing, and then the visual, editing, how things actually move out. For me, I've actually just learned to speak better and longer, try to eliminate ums, and the moment I say I end up umming a lot. But a lot of people don't realize first when they're doing videos that they're even umming, and I've noticed you guys are really good at pausing and just letting there be a little bit of dead space, which is way better than ums. And you want to have that quality of content to where people aren't actually starting to critique your video for how it's set up. The third one would be entertainment value. Did I laugh? Did I learn? Why am I here? What am I getting out of it? And then the fourth and final one is the content subject itself. Is there a base for it? If you're already in an established place, why are people here over another channel? And that's usually a different kind of series or presentation, or you're doing something better than what people already do. And a lot of people get into coming in thinking they're going to do something better than what other people are doing. I actually thought that with Cordero, and then I learned I completely suck at what I was doing, and then I found my own groove and pace. I started streaming regionals before they made a clause against me Konami actually has a clause that it has to be an OTS stores media that uploads it now after I was doing it for a while. But you have to actually look and change and pivot. And right then is when I happened to be doing Market Watch, which then took off even further than my regionals, which was pretty darn nice. But both of them would have just put my channel on another level and been grounded in the community, helping spread things. But then Market Watch really took me, at first controversial. People were like, oh, you're spiking the price of cards. And I'm like, information and people acting on it is going to, yes, change how people actually use their money and will affect the market when there's hundreds of cards versus thousands of eyes on something. But it started to even out to where people realized.
All right, everybody, we had just a little bit of a hiccup with the recording software that we use there because my MacBook is not the best for recording through Discord. So where we believe it cut out was about the time John was talking about the use of actually focusing in on the Market Watch aspect of his channel. So you can kind of pick up where you were, around where you were, you believe, John, and we'll kind of try to transition from there.
So with Market Watch, there's a moment with my channel where I realize I have to stop vending, but I was actively vending while still doing Market Watch. And the reason I would do that is I felt like it had to sharpen me to a degree to put the information out there and then be ahead of it like a couple steps, or in a sense, like, start immediately planning the next phase. Because I wouldn't like put something out that I usually had already bought, but there is a point where that ended up happening and I realized I had to stop vending because that felt like insider trading to me, which does happen all the time. You look back to Spell Chronicle when I think it was specifically around ARG or the Hoban clan, they really hyped up Spell Chronicle as a kind of point and laugh that people will eat up anything in the community and actually spend their money on it. And that's way back then, before all the videos and people are like, oh, Market Watch has changed everything. That's the perfect example of, no, things have always been like that. But I bought a bunch of magnet reverses at 75 cents because a group of a team were planning for it for ABC format, and this was weeks before. By the time ABC format was there, it had crept up to $1.50, and I had a stack of 70 of them or so. And I did a tech highlight set to upload. I was specifically streaming a regional that weekend, so I wasn't even able to like list them right then. And when I got home, Magnet Reverse after my tech highlight was a $20 card. And that tech highlight only got like 4,500, 5,000 views, but people were topping with Magnet Reverse that weekend too. And I sold all of them at $12 while they were still 20. I wanted to just blow them out. I didn't want max value. And I sat back and I thought about it. And I said, that doesn't feel very good. That just doesn't really make sense to me why it doesn't feel good. So I started to sit through and I'm like, that's kind of like insider trading. That's like you held information back from your audience that you could be giving them first. And I typically do act that way, but I had promised this team I wouldn't. And I realized the conflict of interest there for me personally. Now, I also want to say, I don't blame any Market Watch channel who stays active and does their hustle and grind. I actually think you should be very knowledgeable about the game and what you're doing. I know a lot of them are major vendors or keep up with vending or trade, and I think that's perfectly fine. But for me and the scale that I used to operate on, I'd be going for 70, 100, 120 of a card at a time when it's like penny stonks, and that's how a lot of people operate with them. And I just realized, what if you're in my audience and you get the package in and it says John Moore, right? And you could have got it, earlier on when it was cheaper. I wouldn't have felt great about that.
Definitely. So I want to transition a little bit, if that's all right with you.
Go ahead.
So we find that a lot of our listener base is newer and returning players, not necessarily 100%, not necessarily maybe even 80 or 60%. But even if it's 40%, right, there's something to be said for people, and I would feel like this is probably the majority of the actual player base of the game, is playing on a budget, right? Even, of course, you have the whales, right? You have the people that are willing to go out and spend
$1,000 plus.
Right, like the weekend of deck drops, They're not sponsored by anybody. They just really have the money to play the game and buy everything at that level, right? But you have, for every person like that, there's 10 or 15 people that are on a much more of a shoestring budget to play the game. And right now, because of subpar reprints in structure decks, the lack of promos in the tins, and just the real subpar reprint strategy that Konami has gone with over the past, I would say, 2 years, honestly, there really has been an overall rise and just inflation in the value of these cards, and a rise in the amount of money that it takes to really play this game. So I was kind of wondering if, as the resident market expert and the expert on all prices Yu-Gi-Oh related, if you would have any kind of advice or tips for somebody that might be kind of getting into the game on more of a shoestring budget.
Okay, so first let's get the source of the problem and then go to the budget part.
For sure.
The source of the problem is the new product structure ever since Eternity Code, where it went from 8 secret rares a box to 10 secret rares a box and rares left. And everybody took it as me being really mad that rares were gone. No, what I was really mad at was the ratios, because now every single secret rare was almost akin to an old school version of shorted secret rares, where you would see about 2.2 of them per case. Now every single secret rare you're only seeing at 2.4 per case. And for you guys that don't know what a case is, that's 12 booster boxes, so around $720 usually when a set comes out. You're not even seeing a playset of every single secret rare anymore. It's mathematically impossible. Along with this, the all foil side sets ended up switching to these collector rare sets, which have completely failed. The only collector rare sets doing well are the world premiere sets, and every single deck building set, even with good cards inside, is failing because, well, you're only seeing 3 ultra rares per box with 10 different ultra rares, and that leads to 3.6 of each ultra rare per the $720 cases, and that's not worth it for the vendors to open. It's not worth it for the players to open. The entire community is struggling. Special editions also went away, which there was always coolant when special editions came out. People would crack them for the promos. The promos would usually be worth something. Now we have the $15 MSRP package sets like Legendary Duelist Season 1, Season 2, and we have to wait for Megatins to have the reprints. And this last year, they plucked everything out. Access Code Talker, Droplet, Lightning Storm, all missing, where the year before they threw in the kitchen sink. Apolos is already in Gold Series announced. Let's throw that in the tins. Oh, over here, a Pot of Extravagance was in Tooncast. Throw that in the tins. They just double-dipped the reprint everything the year before. But this year, they paid super attention to their secondary market. And you can tell they do. People argue that Konami has no interest in their secondary market, which is completely wrong because it sells future products. What is short-printed and also missing from the tins here in Brothers of Legend? It's Forbidden Droplet. That's exactly it. They are basically selling their own cards within their product through ratios / where they decide a reprint misses and where it goes instead. So that's
also something to be said there for them saying and putting out the announcement that they will no longer be short printing secret rares in sets, and then only implementing that in core sets. That way you end up with sets like Brothers of Legend, where things like you said, like Forbidden Droplet, are severely short printed.
I do want to say they emphasized core sets initially, and some other sets like the world premiere set / the deck building set don't have short prints. It's just that now the new ratio is the old short print ratio, basically.
Right.
For everything. By the way, no more short prints, everything shorted.
Well, yeah, I was about to say, if everything's short print, then nothing is short print.
Yeah, that's the unfortunate truth of it. So that's how we end up in this boat. So to play on a budget is harder than ever before. We already mentioned that rogue prices have risen due to speculation and people going crazier than before. Everybody's saying this next deck's the new net. Remember? Okay, I got so excited. I stumbled here. Marincess. Blue Tang pre-sales were $60 freaking. This is the next Cybers deck that's gonna take over. You'll see. All it did was top like an 80-some-odd person Alabama regional. Sweet home Alabama. That's all it did, man. people really went out of their way to like hype every rogue deck and try to convince you that it's the best deck, and you have to not only navigate that misinformation, but also have like people come to YouTube first off to get information, and they're being spread all these different, oh, this will be the best deck, next undefeated deck, next tier 0 deck is the next Zodiac, and we get it wrong sometimes with our player brain too. Like I said that Eldritch probably not that good, Emancipator is going to be one of the best decks ever, its combos seem insane, and then they both were really freaking good. I way underestimated Eldritch like a lot of Yu-Gi tubers did, but I was super on the spot with Emancipator. You're gonna get it wrong even when you paid attention to this game all the way through, and you're gonna have bad calls, and that's gonna be everybody. But the amount of bad calls out there on YouTube is astra freaking nomical, and you have to learn to navigate that yourself, unfortunately. So with budget, your options are, unfortunately, the sad truth, there's no fairy tale story, replacing the cards with worse options within a metagame that suit your needs. That's all you can do, is take the worst option for less money and try to get as much replacement value either in the arena of this does the same thing, or playing a deck that, this is an old term for you boomers, anti-meta deck that tries to counter as many of the decks in the metagame, but we've had very diverse formats throughout for a long time now because Konami seems vested in that. So anti-meta usually takes on 1 to 3 decks. You can't prepare for 8 different matchups overall as much anymore with an anti-meta deck. You can't ignore what every single deck does. You try to shut down the extra deck, you're going to run into Flounderies. You try to end up countering, you know, specifically like decks that summon a lot, you run into Eldritch. You just can't counter every single deck out there due to the diversity. All you can do is play the field to the best of your ability and take the lesser options, and also take note of trends as you continue to learn Yu-Gi-Oh! For example, Ghost Ogre has recently been a super hot topic, and it has been before. And before that, and before that, and it falls off, comes back, falls off. Unlike Ash Blossom, who has been consistently played in almost every single metagame since inception, Droll and Lockbird and Ghost Ogre are 2 examples of hand traps that have their metagames where they fall back, fall down in price, maybe even get a reprint while that happens, and then spike back up in the future. If you pay attention to cyclical trends, sometimes paying that attention will pay you back later when you get in while it's cheaper, there's a newer reprint or something like that. Like most recently, Ash Blossom, I think, was printed in Gold Series, and the pre-sales were $8, and now that's worth about $30 just a year and a half later.
Yeah, I think that there's definitely something to be said for keeping in mind what's going on, not only as a player, but also really being able to identify what's happening in the market past just what you're playing.
Yeah. So how do you separate your player brain and like the market aspect of it?
It's so hard. It's so freaking hard because even while I was a vendor, player brain would interfere so much, and it would pay off more than it would lose because I'm a decent player. But like, for example, Breakthrough Skill was $7 while it was newer, and I was like, there's no way Breakthrough Skill is going to be an insane card, and I bought like 46 of them, and they ended up being $40 a piece. That's a home run. Then I look at Skill Successor, which is I believe it's called Skill Successor. It's the one where Hades and that the Skull Servant looking guy is blasting, and it's another graveyard effect similar to it. Like, this has to be a great card. It was around $3, and I got a ton of them, and it never panned out. It just didn't do anything, and a lot of people thought it would be insane. There's a lot of overhyped history with cards like all the way dating back to Tactical Evolution. Crystal Seer, I believe, came out of that. It pre-sold for $40, and it dropped to $10. People thought it would be the second coming of the Apprentice engine being in the metagame, and it's such a crazy card effect for its time, and kind of was, but it didn't pan out, and a lot of people's player brain lost them a lot of money at that pre-sale. So I will say this, going into that little segue, pre-sales and also by that venue sneak peeks have some of the most cloudy eye overhype that will happen, but also some of the best prices you'll ever see on a card, and that's where you unfortunately have to use player brain. You have to say, okay, what's likely to drop down? This rogue deck's probably not going to be worth much on release from a core set. It's probably going to go down in price, but this card's going to be played in every deck. Do we go for pre-sales now? Like Access Code Talker, it was a $40 secret rare on the pre-sales, and even Farfa was pointing out, yo, that's way too cheap, man. And it spiked to 70 during pre-sales, never looked back, continue to go up in price. There's cards like that end up being missed by vendors, and pre-sales can be some of the best times to make money, but it's often that sneak peeks, since there's only so many copies in that room, people get super hungry, gotta have that card now, where they rip themselves off in that hype. So now, you're connected electronically to the world. You can look at all these different vendors who exist for a reason and go, I see they're pre-selling it for this price. Is it likely to go up? How much is it going to go for if it does go up versus, that's called opportunity cost, not a financial advisor over here. Opportunity cost is where you basically look at, if I don't put my money down now, where else can I put it? And am I likely to get a better return later on that money versus it's sitting there or not pulling the trigger here? And people often associate that with FOMO, fear of missing out, which also tends to have them overstep, which is what we're referencing in the room with the sneak peek. I want to say that it's one of the craziest times. You know, the seeing something like DPE sell obviously for too cheap, or Crossout Designator sell for 4x its price and people get ripped off. And I often have the right call on these kinds of things, but not always. In these instances, I pointed out, definitely had the right calls. But sometimes, like, let's say Arlecchino, it's gonna definitely help that Altergeist. It's gonna bring it back, baby. No, Arlecchino did end up spiking in price. I was right about it, but then it never panned out. My player brain was absolutely wrong. Well, I'm starry-eyed playing the deck, winning with it a bunch, and it turns out I'm winning on Dueling Book, not playing against the best decks, and I probably overhyped that one. So you do have to look at situations like that, but to be fair, a lot of people fell for Arlecchino. He's a good-looking guy. And went and spent their money on him. He went from $8, $12, $20, $22, and now he's like a $4 card.
Yeah, I took the L on early. I took the L on early Crossout Designator. That was a
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, hey, good news is I took the W on pre-sale.
my early Crossout Designator.
I was also, yes, but I was also going to say of the
DPE.
the pre-release DPEs. I pulled one at the pre-release, immediately turned around and sold it for $125.
yeah, like I was saying, people in that room will just crash themselves like a wave against a rock, trying to get over no matter what it takes. Sometimes they feel like they gotta have that card then and there. And it's one of the weirdest things to actually witness throughout like the history of the game.
At that same pre-release event, I was like, okay, I'm gonna do it. I'm just gonna go in. I'm gonna get all the Sword Soul stuff right away.
Oof.
And that one dude was in there, and he paid. He was like, Mo Yi, here you go, $80. Ecclesias, here you go, $100 right there, cash money. He was buying them, and I was like, nope, too rich for my blood. Nope, I'll wait. And I waited. And I got them at a much more reasonable price, and I have still lost money. So, you know.
I think that's what helps a lot now, though. While those sneak peeks start to happen now, they're called premiere events to be super confusing with a premiere top. But with the sneak peeks, as I'll reference them as a boomer, I feel like...
I'll be honest, I didn't even know that the name changed because we came back in the game around release of Toon Chaos. This is actually the first time I'm realizing that they're not called sneak peeks anymore.
Same, actually.
I think Konami saw the term YouTube premiere and said, you know what? It's the premiere of a set. What a grand entrance.
Wow. I'm sorry. So I cut you off. What were you saying?
I think I was talking about just how crazy it is in the room there and how bad it can get. But with pre-sales being so much more prevalent in the community from vendors who are just interested in making their little sliver of profit off the side of the whole, that's why you see them sometimes underestimate those star cards all so often. Like almost every single event, there's something you can point to in pre-sales and say, oh wow, that was worth that at pre-sale. It's sure worth more now, just a couple weeks later, where the average advice from the people I see in the comment section, just wait, it'll go down in a couple weeks. I feel like that is the number one advice people try to give, and it's more so, no, you pick out the 3 to 5 things you think will go up in a set for your bingo list. You look at everything else, it will probably go down, but there's going to be around 3 to 5 things that are going to do a little 180 in a good set and start just climbing, and run away from it. And due to pre-sales being mass accessible, it's a lot harder to rip yourself off in that room of a sneak peek unless you're that guy who has to have it right then, right now, and feels like you secured the bag.
Absolutely. So I think that now is a wonderful time to go into our podcast question of the day. Of course, this is our question that we read off at the end of every episode. We read some of the answers that we got from the last episode, and we'll give you a new one. So last episode podcast question of the day was, I wanted to know, what decks are you building right now? We got some great answers. Some people are building Despia. Some people are building Sharks, Punk World. Some people are building things like Dinosaur, Fluffle. Fluffle's a really cool deck, in my opinion. I love Fluffle. Of course, I may have just been talking with Giant Skyhawk a little too much, but, it's okay. I still enjoy it.
He's got you brainwashed on that Fluffle goodness.
He's got me pilled, is what he's got me. Dragoon, Eldritch, things like that. Flunder, Sky Striker, Prank Kids, DDD. A lot of people are building DDD. I've seen so many people building DDD. So, but the new podcast question of the day will be, what is a card that you think is entirely too cheap right now? I feel like this is the right episode for that question.
It really is.
So, Mr. John Moore, thank you so much for joining us on today's episode. It really means a lot for you to come on, hang out, chat with us for a little while, talk about that market watch aspect of the community that I think a lot of people either may just not put enough thought into when playing this game, because I think that the pricing of these cards is so deeply intertwined with the game itself at this point. It's so deeply necessary to understand if you're overpaying for a card, if you're getting a good deal, things like that. So it means a lot for you to come on and talk with us and, educate our listener base a little bit on some of the intricacies of working within the market.
A good note to end on here, actually, with that, is how community-driven that really is. And that goes hand in hand with me, and how I said earlier, I don't know if it got cut out, but it's how growing the entire community as a whole ends up coming back to you. Yu-Gi-Oh! And its prices as a heartbeat really show how connected we are, considering how terrible pricing is, and that there's not really an end game, cash-wise, to playing Yu-Gi-Oh!, yet the metagame influences prices so much like that, because people love playing this game so gosh darn much. Even if the prizes don't match that at the end of the day, people are that crazy for the game within the communal aspect.
That is a wonderful segue. So thank you all so much for joining us on today's episode of the podcast. Be sure to give it a follow if you're on Spotify or iTunes. Be sure to give us a go ahead and subscribe, like, and all of that business on YouTube. It helps out on the algorithm. And of course, we'll see you Tuesday, just like every week.
Oh yeah, take care, everybody.